Welcome to our latest and next installment of User's Guides. And we have a Ferrari Enzo, but actually today we're going to work on something a little bit more special and in fact extremely rare, being one of only 50, the Maserati MC12. Commonly thought of as just simply a reclothed Enzo, but that is not true. And to help explain this today, we have none other than Frank Stephenson, designer of the MC12, to talk us through it. So,
yeah,
great to see you. Thanks
Very
for coming.
good to see you. Thank you.
So Frank, first of all, how did it come about, the MC12?
Well, we all know how powerful Ferrari has been for Formula One and how long they've been in Formula One. Right around the early 2000s, about 2003, Maserati and Ferrari being cousins almost. The decision by the exec team was that we have to get Maserati back into racing. Obviously, we don't want to tread on Ferrari's toes with a new Maserati race car going into Formula One. So the decision was, let's go back into racing as a FIA GT class car.
And specifically the GT1 class.
That's exactly the class, yeah. And for that class, you basically need to have a certain amount of cars, 25, that are homologated for the road. And what most companies would do is tweak those or tune those cars and turn them into FIA GT1 segment cars. And Maserati thought, well, we want to win this thing. We're not going to get into it for just playing around. Let's come in through the back door, design a race car, and make 25 road cars.
So they did it in reverse, effectively. Instead of building a road car and then building a race version of the road car, they built a race
Italian.
car and then said, we've got to do 25 homologation specials.
Yeah, it almost guaranteed a sure winner because you're coming in through the back door and building a race car that later you just tweak and turn it into a road car.
Feels like more of a Ferrari-esque thing to do, dare I say.
Well, if there's ever loopholes,
you'll
find them in Italy, that's for sure.
Very reminiscent of the 250 LM of 60,
Absolutely.
63, 64.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So what we end up with is a car that's over 5 meters in length. And I say over because this car is one of the first 25 cars. And a myth that we've got to sort of cover immediately is this short and long.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, it's short nose and long nose. So what was the story behind that? How did the cars go from being over 5 meters to 5?
Well, there was never a plan to make 50 of them anyways, because the minimum was 25 that we had to do, and it was probably not the easiest thing in the world to find 25, people out there with that kind of disposable income for those prices back then.
It'd be so much easier today, but back then it was tough. I mean, I remember they've struggled to sell the last Enzos. So out of the European allocation, we helped them sell the last 3 or 4 cars to UK clients.
Yes, that's exactly.
It was just a very different time.
Well, they had to, so the 25, they managed to get it. They got 25 people on board who promised and signed for acquiring the car. And then we had to basically take the car to Paris to get it homologated and certified according to the rules for the season. And I think they were a little bit upset because when they did see this car, they thought, well, you guys have basically fooled us, and you've actually not produced a road car. You produced a race car that you'll later obviously turn into a road car. And the car at the time was 5 meters 15 long. And they immediately changed the rules, saying that the overall length could only be 5 meters for the next season. So that extra 15 had to be either cut out or the car wouldn't be qualified or allowed to be racing.
So hence they had to build, in theory, 25 more.
Well, it wasn't only building them, it was also finding people. Another 25 customers, which you'd think today, like you said, probably would be easier. But back in those days, it wasn't. But they found them pretty quickly. And so it allowed us to build another 25 at a different length.
And that length change, so to dispel the myth, is it a long short tail or is it a long short nose?
Exactly.
Long short nose, right?
Yeah.
And so the difference is just in the front bumper? Or
just in the front bumper, basically, yeah. You can see some of them have a bit of a stubbier nose, you could say. We weren't able to change anything from here. You have your lighting homologation, crash shears. We had enough distance to compensate for that. And it's not a heck of a lot. It's minimal. You'd have to actually get down and measure it. But I grew up with it, and I can tell, sort of when you work on them that intensely, you start to recognize little things that'll tell you if it's the long nose or short nose. But at the same time, we never told any of the customers, so basically they don't know if they have, unless they have the number, which, you know, if it lies over the 25 mark, it's the shorter nose, but it's a nice little anecdote, I think you could say, to the actual build process, because it changed a little bit the aerodynamics of the car. You know, the whole underbody underneath is a little bit different from there. But working on the car was really a labor of love. It wasn't really done at all at Maserati in Modena. All the engineering work was done by Dallara out in Parma. So we had our own engineers there. We had access to a lot of the aero testing that we had to do with the engineering there. And we did it in 4 months, which is incredible, pretty fast. Of course, we started with an existing platform, so there's a lot of, the groundwork was already there.
I mean, that's an incredibly short time frame, 4 months.
Yeah,
so
very intense. I mean,
pen to paper to first car.
Yes, we had to meet a timing schedule, so we had to, it was 7 days a week. But when you're talking about engineers whose only job is to build a race car, or has only ever done a race car, those type of engineers are quite passionate, and time is irrelevant, you know.
And so moving on to the platform itself then. So the major differences between an Enzo and an MC12, and I think the one that will surprise everyone is actually wheelbase.
Wheelbase, yeah. Yeah, we extended the wheelbase on this because it was necessary to, more than anything for the aerodynamics of the car, we needed to play with a lot more surfacing and get the air much more controlled over the surfaces. The Enzo isn't really one of the most aerodynamic cars in the first place. This car, for racing purposes, it's all about downforce, and the more you can actually control the air, have control about where it goes and how much pressure it puts on different areas of the car, is the reason why we had to pull the wheelbase forward, so it's quite a bit forward.
So it's basically relative to, if you like, the steering wheel. The front wheels are 15 centimeters further forward.
Yes, yeah.
And what was the idea behind that? Is that for high-speed stability?
I think it was a lot to do with probably the package. So the suspension was changing, the A-arms, everything there is slightly different. The basic stance of the car to be a lot more planted on the road. You know, you widen the wheelbase or lengthen the wheelbase, you're going to have a lot more plant on the road. So I think there's a few factors like that, but it gave us a lot more room also on the air flowing through the body. It comes out through the wheel wells, and we had a lot more area in here. Suck some of the air out. It's non-existent pretty much on the
yeah, I mean, the comparison between the two, you can just see that there's a bit of an exit on the Enzo, but
yeah,
for this MC12, just looking in front of these doors,
yeah,
there's a huge amount of area and volume of air that you can get out. And so these little sculpted hinge covers, I guess, that's just really following function.
It is. We had to shove that as far as we could, because also the more you can take material away, the less the weight of the car is. But by shoving that all in there, we had clearance issues with the hinges, so you get these beautiful, almost local bumps, I guess.
And totally unique. You know, what other car has like big bumps and doors?
Well, in Italy, you're allowed to do that. It's like, you know, shapes in Italy are everything. So, but it gave you a lot more area, square centimeter area for the air coming out of the wheel well. Similar to what we have the same radiator setup as on the Enzo. But that hot air here, you typically would not want it to go back into the snorkel area and not into your side intakes. That's all calculated. Well, what's interesting is here, we had to actually open up the area to get the heat out, much more heat out. And
for the racing car?
For the racing car, yeah.
At high temperatures.
The problem is then when you go to do a road version of it, you're ending up with a hole that's quite large, much larger than on the Enzo. And there's a legal issue with that, because on a pedestrian impact area, which is the bonnet, the hood, you have to be careful that the certified size that we use for a baby's head cannot fall into a hole. And that hole was too big. So we had to find some kind of solution to reduce the possibility of a baby's head going.
And so that's the reason behind these strakes.
That's the strakes, which I think have become a little bit iconic on the car.
It's so Maserati.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, if you think about the Trident,
exactly.
So Maserati.
Yeah, I mean, when you're open to designing anything, one would have done it. But if you're thinking about Maserati, you're always thinking about the Trident. And, you know, even on the wheels, if you look on the wheel spokes, you'll see that little dip, that almost fang that we have on the spoke. And we also have it here on the front. So every little part of the car, you'll see also in the interior.
And the scoop. Obviously, we had a quick chat about it earlier, but you know, the scoop for GT1 rules, they had to have their air intake for the engine from the roof area.
Yeah.
But but on the road car, actually, the air intakes for the engine are from the side feeds. So this still serves a purpose, and it's so iconic to the car as well. Like, there's nothing cooler than a roof scoop.
No, you can't beat that.
Like a McLaren 675 LT now.
Well, you get that snarl, that sort of, vacuum and pressure change, and it sucks air in, you can hear it. But this is more, this is not feeding the engine in any way. What it is doing is feeding cooling to the engine bay, which gets extremely hot, and we have to get it out as well. So, heat soak from these vents here, which are kind of iconic. I always felt when I did this that I was going to get criticized for making it look like an Alfa Romeo shield. And but it came out nice, and was,
no one might have ever thought of it unless you hadn't said that.
Well, that's the first thing I thought when I was doing it. I stood back and looked at it and go, all right, it looks good.
And what about Targa roof then?
That's a good thing. I think a lot of people don't know it's a Targa.
Where did that come from though? Because obviously, again, you're starting with the Enzo, which has got a fixed
gull
roof.
wing,
I guess it's got the central spine. So how did that come into the process?
It was just another way of doing it that didn't cost us a lot of money. And we thought it would be a good thing if we could do it, and added value or added advantage. And didn't really have anything to do with weight or anything like that, because if you remove the top, it's not really a good place to take weight out anyways. It's all more or less down there. But it was just something we thought when we did it. It was a good idea to do it.
I love it. So then finally at the back here.
Yeah, we come up with a massive, massive spoiler. Now this isn't obviously it's different from the race spoiler, but the race spoiler is just meant for pure intent. And it does look race, whereas this one's got a bit of styling into it, but it doesn't kill it in terms of performance.
And the color combination. So was that something that you said we should go for this theme, or was it did they say we want to celebrate our heritage? Which way around did it happen?
No, it didn't. It just went straight for. We didn't have time for any of that kind of bullshit. It's basically, what do you think?
It's the best way.
Well, if you do it responsibly, yeah. So I knew the colors for Maserati. I was in my younger days, I was a custom car painter, so I knew about graphics and pinstripes and all that. But I wanted to visually take weight out of the car because I knew it was huge, and so that's why the rear end ended up being one solid color, because on the side of it, you still notice it, but your first impression is it isn't that long.
I never thought about that though.
That's the only reason I did it. I needed
to
cut the mass off the back of it.
When you were designing this, and obviously you knew that you were designing a race car to then turn it into a road car and created the Stradale, did you think about the GT1 series before then, where you had the CLK GTR and the 911 GT1, which kind of did the same thing? And interestingly, like the last 4 or 5 years, they've seen such an increase in value and appreciation that people sort of had known they were special and rare, but hadn't really appreciated it. And we're seeing it the same again with this, because especially like the CLK GTR, they were unstoppable as a race car. They won the GT1 championship, I think, 5 times, certainly 4. And at that time, did you know it was going to be that good?
No, you never. Whenever you're starting a project, you have zero idea what it's going to end up looking like. You have a vision in your mind when you sit down and draw and sketch, and you have all these really rough, dirty first theme ideas, which are the ones you want to hold on to, because typically the first ideas are just spitting out your intuition, and the refinement sketches later on are nice, but basically the thinking's been done by that point. So the original sketches that I remember doing for the MC12 were all based around one of my most favorite race series of all time. They had that look to it, because the car can look like anything, but I'm a huge Group C fan, and nothing beats a race car for me in design. Nothing beats a Group C car for me. So I tried to get that kind of feel to the car, albeit obviously bigger than that, but Group C for me has always been one of the most shape determines look solutions. So, and in that respect, the cars look absolutely stunning. You can't beautify a car.
And we know that, as this car has proved, and hopefully will prove more, that whenever a car has great racing pedigree,
the prettier it gets. That's what Enzo said. The prettiest cars are the ones that win.
Exactly.
But the car has enough iconic features, I think, on it to justify a longer, sort of a long-lasting life. you couldn't confuse this car with any other car on the market. You know, there are a lot of Group C cars, when they flash by, you think, hold on a sec, yeah. And the more uniqueness I think that you can bring into the design of a car without hindering the performance, because again, designers, unless you're trained in such a way that you understand performance, you're probably designing for beauty, and that's never the right way to design a car. The cars are beautiful because they do well, they perform well. And if you just try to design a vehicle that performs well, you can't screw it up. I mean, there are car companies that have screwed it up. We'll talk about that later. But you have to try pretty hard to make a nice performing car not look good. Yeah. And it applies to just about any race car we've ever seen. There aren't, I mean, probably some of the more interesting cars are the more radical ideas. We had the, if you remember, the Chaparral.
Yes.
And we had Tyrrell six-wheeler, for example, also different, very different. They all, I mean, they're still iconic looking cars.
People
today.
like the look of them because they're different as
yeah,
well.
Yeah,
just like this.
Yeah.
Good.
They're very identifiable.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to
It's a
talk
pleasure.
through it.
Gosh.
And yeah, hope it's nice to be reunited.
Yeah, it always is. Yeah.
I mean, there's so few of them.
Yeah. Whenever you run into one, it's I remember where I was on that date. Yeah, it's great to see it here in UK.
So now let's have a full look at the MC12 as part of our user's guide. So I'm going to start with the interior. It's got, unlike the Enzo, which has a door lever underneath the end of the door, it's got a traditional on-display door handle with the lock involved. And one thing you notice when you open the door, the windows drop because, of course, on the MC12, unlike an Enzo, they are electric. So straight away, the interior of the MC12 is a lot more of a friendly, comfier place. It hasn't got, unlike an Enzo, that suspended bare carbon dash. It has a real sort of cockpit feel to it with these very easy to use air conditioning switches, very much like older Ferraris, in fact, air vents, and that wonderful Maserati clock in the centre. So, again, unlike the Enzo, it doesn't have the indicator buttons on the steering wheel. It has a very much more traditional steering wheel with the horn push on each side of the steering wheel, and then two sets of stalks. You've also got the paddles, so on the left it's down the gearbox, on the right up the gearbox, and then we've got the traditional of this sort of era, turn the key, press the start button, a big thing in the early noughties. Sounds the job, doesn't it? Then for the rest of the cockpit, it's fairly basic. You've got on the end of the centre binnacle here a 12-volt cigarette lighter supply. Again, something that you don't find in the Enzo. You've got a little cubby hole in the centre here just to keep your bits and pieces. The bottom switches here are your left or right mirror adjust, electric adjust. For those, of course, you don't have a rear view mirror in the windscreen because we've got a solid bulkhead behind us. Then you've got your button for the hazard lights. You've got your parking light button, your traction control turned off button, put it into race mode, rear fog light, press and hold for reverse, and then finally your front lift. So you just press the button once. Exactly the same system as an Enzo or an F50. And then once it's up, just press it again and down it goes. The steering wheel has a simple angle adjust, so you undo that, move the steering wheel up or down, and then push it back again for it to be tight. Then on the left-hand side of the dash here, got a couple of buttons to do with the odometer, so this takes you between trip and total mileage. The seats are actually quite adjustable, so totally manual. Under the front here, you've got a bar that you pull up, and then you slide the seat backwards and forwards to where you'd like to go to. And then on the inside of each seat, you've got this handle that you lift up and you hold up, which lets you adjust the recline of the seat. Behind this little knee pad here is a battery cut-off switch, so you just pull the cover open and twist it clockwise to turn the battery off, and anti-clockwise to turn the battery on. Just pop that closed, and there you are. Whilst it's comfortable and luxurious in here with these subtle Maserati hints in the design of the dashboard, above you it's absolutely plain and raw, and even behind you you've got a real race car feel with this roll bar built in with no padding whatsoever, just there, raw as it would be in the race car. On the near side of the car, between the seat and the sill, you've got this fly-off handbrake. Works in the same way as many old Ferraris. Pull it up, that's on, it'll go down on its own. And in order to release the handbrake, you bring it all the way back up, pull the button, lift the handbrake up, keep holding the button, and let it down. And that's your handbrake off. So the windscreen wiper is the right-hand stalk. We've got a single arm on the windscreen, and we go down one for the intermittent mode, and you can twist to give the different speeds, and then go down one more for medium speed, and then to the bottom for the higher speed. Then on the left-hand stalk we've got the indicators, which is straightforward, down for left, up for right. And then on the same stalk you've got the lights, which is a traditional twist, so twist once for side lights, once more for headlights, on dip beam, and then push the stalk away from you for main beam. Finally, on each door you've got your window switches. So on the driver's door we've got 2 window switches for the electric windows to go up and down. As I mentioned earlier, that's something you don't find in the Enzo. So that's the interior. But just before we move on to the engine bay, the real party trick of this car. This whole panel is a Targa panel that's removable. Just one clip each side. So we lift the front up, slide it forward, slide it out, and off we go. Before we move on to the engine bay, we'll just have a look under the front. And like all fantastic GT1 braking race cars, like the CLK GTR, it's actually a 3-man job to open the front because it's a completely removable front clam. So to start off, we've got to undo the 2 clips on each side. There's a push button on the side of this clip here, which you push in. Then you pull it up and it releases like that. Before we take the front clam off, we've got to disconnect the electrics and we've got to disconnect the headlamp washers. So top tip, full left-hand lock, put your arm in through here and it's just a twist anti-clockwise and it'll undo. Then for the headlamp washers, we move around to the other side. Another top tip, press the nose lift button so that you've got enough height to go in above the wheel. And on this side, it's actually just about here, just in line with the middle of the wheel, and it's much like an airline where you disconnect it. And then now for the removal. So we lift the front clam up to about 45 degrees, and then we ease it out of the location holes, lift it up, and place it on conveniently located trestle. Thank you, guys. So under the front here, some could say there's not much to see, but actually there's an awful lot to see because everything's on display. You've got the wishbones, and you can visibly see, if you know what an Enzo looks like underneath, you can actually visibly see how far further forwards the front suspension is. You've got this push rod suspension, your remote reservoirs for the shock absorbers, chassis ID plate under the front here, and then the bits and pieces that might be useful to a user. So this is your toolkit in here. You've got your towing eye on the top here, which screws into the towing eye socket in the front here. You've got your filler for the windscreen washer fluid, and then the battery here, so the negative terminal, and underneath this cover here, the positive terminal, and a place to perhaps connect a booster pack to if ever you need to boost start the car. Inside the toolkit, let's take a look inside. So in here we've got the tyre inflator and your Get Your Home gel, which you'll never use. We've got a case of spare fuses and the socket to remove the wheels. And under the front here, you've also got your 2 paint codes for Bianco Fuji and for Blue, as well as the Pirelli P0 sticker that indicates the tyre pressures for each. And an interesting point, the Enzo was originally supplied on Bridgestone tyres, whereas the MC12 was on Pirelli P0s. So we've pretty much completed our tour of the car. We've been under the front, we've been through the interior, we've looked at all the little details. We know that essentially these cars were longer, wider, taller because of the air snorkel than an Enzo. A longer wheelbase, in fact, and all because it was a race car, and this is the road version of that race car that was oh so successful in GT1. And there are a couple of other little hints to the fact that it's a racing car. For example, the center locks on the driver's side are in red and on the passenger side in blue, a little bit like a Carrera GT, so that you couldn't get them mixed up side to side. But the final thing we need to look at is the engine. So to get into the engine bay, we open the driver's door. The right lever opens the fuel filler cap, and the left lever opens the engine bay. And the engine bay opens from the back, and the easiest way is to put your hand in through the air vent here and lift up. These two levers, like an F50, pull back and lock into position. And there you have it, essentially an Enzo engine, albeit with one main difference. Instead of the camshafts being chain-driven, they're driven by gears, and that's for racing efficiency and reliability. But as a result, it gives more of a harsh feeling to the engine, a noisier engine in the engine bay, but obviously this is a race car for the road, so thumbs up from my point of view. Now, the Enzo was like this, a 6.5 litre V12 that produced 650 horsepower, but for the MC12, its red line was 7,500 revs as opposed to 8,000 revs, and it produced 620 horsepower. But it was a whole 80 kilos lighter as a car, therefore meaning that round the Nürburgring, for example, it was indeed faster than the Enzo. And the top speed was lower because it had a shorter sixth gear, meaning 205 miles an hour was where it topped out. Now in the engine bay, there's a few things to look at. There are the major servicing points, which we wouldn't recommend you get involved with, but sometimes someone might like to check the oil level. So this is your dry sump oil tank sitting on top of the gearbox, exactly the same as an Enzo. And the procedure is get it warm up to sort of 80 to 90 degrees, hold the revs at 4,500 revs for 1 minute, and then leave it for 4 minutes, and then check your oil level. So to put the engine cover down, you simply lift it up, flick both of these levers forwards, get it to a few inches above the engine cover level, and drop it, and that should close it. And there we have it, the Maserati MC12, one of only 50 cars built, or possibly less, of a run of homologation specials, so that this could be one of the most successful racing GT cars of all time, going to a remarkable number of overall GT1 victories. And in fact, just like the Mercedes CLK GTR, so fast that it had to be banned. And this is the Stradale version, and absolutely a very, very special part of Maserati's history and race car history, but one that's available for the road. Hope you've enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you with our next user's guide, which will most likely be the Enzo. Stay tuned.